In France, in the center of Paris, stands the Louvre Palace, the largest museum in the world, visited by more than 10 million people every year. This immense building covers a vast 243,000 square meters, making it the largest architectural assemblage in France.
The Louvre is a palace that has few equivalents in Europe or the world.
Today, the Louvre is known for its pyramid, a monumental structure of glass and steel. But since its origin, the palace has seen exceptional technological innovation.
The palace itself is the very first work of art presented to visitors.
8 centuries of architectural advances that have transformed a simple royal residence into the largest museum on the planet.
We took the best architects, we took the best stone, and we put a lot of money into building this monument.
The Louvre is one of the most famous monuments in the world, but it is also one of the most mysterious, and it still hides construction secrets.
The Louvre may seem like a very well-known palace, but that doesn't mean that if you look, there isn't a lot new to discover.
By scanning the palace from the satellite and aerial scale to the molecular scale, scientists can now unravel the greatest mysteries of the Louvre.
We make the building speak by using means that let us visualize the infinitely small and make the material and its most intimate aspects speak for themselves.
Investigators will use an advanced drone for the first time.
We fly extremely close to the pyramid, as close as 3 meters, so it's quite complicated.
And conduct 3D laser surveys of the structure.
It's accurate to 1,000th of a degree.
To reveal the secrets hidden behind the Louvre, completely invisible to the naked eye.
New technology will bring answers and expose secrets.
Technology will unlock the mysteries of the Louvre's construction and reveal the genius of its architects, exposing the incredible link between the museum and the greatest monuments of Paris.
It seems very hard to imagine, but this lining up of the view was not possible in the past.
How did builders construct one of the world's largest palaces in the heart of Paris? What construction techniques are hidden within the palace's walls? What technical innovations allow engineers to tunnel just 15 meters beneath a building that houses many priceless treasures?
Digging so close to the heritage collections and to a work as important as the Mona Lisa, it's completely crazy.
History, science, engineering. Exposed as never before, the Louvre Palace finally reveals itself on every scale. The Louvre is an architectural masterpiece in the heart of Paris. It is one of the largest palaces in the world and occupies a big part of the capital's center. How did builders construct such an immense structure in one of the most densely populated cities in the world? Today, satellite images make it possible to visualize the monument's oversized plan in its entirety. The Louvre Palace and the neighboring Tuileries estate cover 42 hectares, the equivalent of 40 football pitches. So how did builders over 8 centuries of evolution construct one of the largest palaces on the planet? To understand how this monumental structure came into being, it's necessary to go back to the source of the monument and investigate the mystery of its origin.
The very first Louvre no longer exists on the surface. So it's necessary to go down into the depths, as it were, to discover it.
A few meters below the monument, researchers have uncovered finely cut foundations dating back to the 12th century. This exceptional masonry from the Middle Ages is evidence of the very first building of the Louvre.
This is the heart of the medieval fortress of the Louvre. Here we are in the dungeon's ditches that were dry and paved and which surrounded the imposing central keep of the courtyard. So it was 15 meters in diameter.
These archaeological discoveries shed light on the Louvre's origin. Now, 3D modeling exposes what the building looked like in the Middle Ages. Ancient builders constructed the fortress as a square military building with walls spanning 80 meters. They defended its walls with circular towers and built a 30-meter-high keep at its center, a symbol of royal power. The foundations are evidence of a fortified castle built 800 years ago by a French king called Philip Augustus. What's surprising is that the same fortresses with the same plan and similar construction principle can be found in cities all over France.
It's really the implementation of a new style of castle called Philippians, like Philip Augustus. There are as many as 20 castles that copy, sometimes with variants, this style from the Louvre.
So why did so many fortified castles in France copy the Château de Louvre? The answer to this riddle lies in examining the structure at a macroscopic scale. Geologists want to determine the origin of these building stones.
This is quite typical of the stone of the period. The stone of Paris is heterogeneous. You can see beds of marine fossils here. You see? We're looking at stones which were extracted in the quarries of the 13th district, or arrondissement of Paris.
Examining the stone at a macroscopic scale exposes mysteriously shaped marks. Engravings of crosses, triangles, or even hearts can be seen all over the masonry.
These engraved hearts are marks carved by stonemasons in the quarries during the manufacture of the blocks, before they were transported to the Louvre and installed at the building sites. The aim was for the stonemason to be able to be paid for each block of stone he made, and the whole procedure shows the sophistication of the Louvre building site.
These marks reveal how builders ensured efficiency at each stage of the construction of this monumental fortified castle. The building site is gigantic for the end of the 12th century. For the first time in France, King Philip II's engineers design a construction method that can be easily reproduced.
Their idea was probably to define a number of model structures. Above all, a great deal of attention was paid to the organization of the building site to make this construction as efficient as possible.
The first Louvre was built in just 10 years, an astonishing feat for this period of the Middle Ages. From the very beginning of its construction, the Louvre has been a fortress of impressive dimensions. It served as a model for the king's castles, but it is still far from the scale of the present Louvre. Examining the site on the satellite scale exposes the difference in size.
In the Middle Ages, the castle was only a quarter the size of one of the courtyards of today's Louvre, the square courtyard.
So how and why did builders upgrade the imposing Middle Ages fortress to build one of the world's largest palaces? The first step in this metamorphosis was to transform a defensive castle into a residence suitable for a king.
The great evolution is the moment when they decided to destroy, piece by piece, the Louvre of the Middle Ages to create a truly modern residence. And this is the work of the Renaissance in the middle of the 16th century.
A branch of the palace known as the Lescaut wing is the only building from this era still visible today. But at first glance, there is nothing to differentiate between the periods of construction.
We're here in the square courtyard of the Louvre. Under our feet are the remains of the medieval castle of Philip Augustus, and we have the Renaissance buildings by Lescaut.
Examining masonry at the macroscopic scale reveals the construction techniques used in the Renaissance.
It's Paris stone with a fine grain. It's hard, it's resistant, and therefore they mostly use it for wall bases, masonry bases. Here we see the Paris stone, up to here, and above, stone from L'Oise, which has a coarser grain that is more yellowish. It is a marine limestone, which is the same age, but which is coarser. But it's a firm limestone, which constitutes the main part of the masonry of the Lescaut wing.
This Renaissance-era masonry technique has been found in all stages of the palace's construction. Builders used this hard stone for the bases of walls and windows, the parts of the structure most susceptible to weathering. But they used a different, softer rock called Oise stone to make up the bulk of the palace buildings. The royal residence, although upgraded, was still the same size as the original castle. So how did the palace transform from a 6,000 square meter castle into a building 20 times larger today? Why and how did this royal residence become the largest palace on the planet? Now investigators have discovered that the fate of the Louvre is linked to a building that no longer exists today. The remains of this building can only be seen with radar technology. Today, Thibaut Sevenat is exploring the west end of the building. He wants to investigate the soil underneath the so-called tile gardens using geostatic radar technology.
We're carrying out georadar measurements using a device that sends electromagnetic probes into the ground to analyze everything in the subsoil to a depth of 3 or 4 meters.
The antenna sends a magnetic field into the ground, and a receiver records the signal that returns.
We're trying to detect remains in the area of the former Tuileries Palace, which could potentially lie in the first 2 or 3 meters. When doing archaeological research on a monument that is a few centuries old, you can find foundations, and you can sometimes find empty cellars.
Very quickly, the radar locates hidden remains several meters, foundations located between the 2 wings of the Louvre Palace over a distance of nearly 250 meters. Examining satellite images exposes the contours of this ancient lost palace. This is the Tuileries Palace, commissioned in 1564 by the Queen Mother Catherine de' Medici for her personal use. She decided to build her home 500 meters west of the Louvre Castle on the outskirts of Paris, in an area that was still countryside at the time.
You have to realize that the Louvre and the Tuileries were 2 completely separate palaces at first that had little to do with each other, until King Henry IV decided to link the 2 palaces by a large gallery alongside the Seine.
The royal residence is located on one side of the Louvre, and on the other, the castle built by the Queen's mother. It was King Henry IV, more than 400 years earlier, who decided to link these 2 castles and transform an entire district of Paris for a single purpose: to build the largest palace in Europe.
This is called the Grand Design. It's an extremely ambitious project, but also a very difficult project to carry out, because between the 2 palaces, there was a whole area of city that they needed to evacuate and destroy.
Henry IV ordered the Great Gallery, a 460-meter-long and 13-meter-wide building to link the 2 palaces. It was a huge and unprecedented construction project for the time. This new work increased the Louvre's surface area. The dimensions are breathtaking. From the foot of the monument, it's almost impossible to see the end of it.
And the kings didn't stop there. To succeed in giving order to this area, there's this big wing which stretches alongside the River Seine. It was Napoleon who would launch the idea of a second wing that would run along the Rue de Rivoli, which he started work on and which would be finished by Napoleon III.
For 2 centuries, the Louvre was steadily expanding. The gigantic size of the project required huge financial and labor resources. But how did the builders supply stone to such a huge project? The quarries in Paris and Oise were no longer sufficient.
The demand for stone was enormous, and so they were calling on quarry sites further and further away. Ideally, the stone was transported by river, but with the advent of the railway, everything changed. Stone could be transported from quarry sites that were far from rivers and streams, so stone from anywhere in France could arrive in Paris without a problem.
In 1870, the Louvre Palace was finally completed. At the time, it was the largest building in France, covering 135,000 square meters of the capital.
The Louvre is a very long-term project that spans almost 800 years. It's a situation that has no real equivalent in any other building in Europe.
It is a seed that has never stopped growing due to the will of the various sovereigns, then of the emperors who succeeded one another at the head of the French state, and finally it represents the heritage that we've now known since the end of the 19th century.
Thanks to the construction of the Tuileries Palace, which long ago burned to the ground, the first Louvre castle was transformed over centuries into a royal palace that is the largest monument ever built in Paris. Today, the 243,000 square meters of the Louvre houses a treasure trove of architectural masterpieces. During each period of construction, builders tried to outdo each other in technical prowess as they enlarged the monument.
When you arrive in the building, you have the impression that everything we see today was built at the same time. But in reality, this is the result of a long evolution and of major transformations.
But what hidden technical innovations allowed architects to make the Louvre appear as if it was built in one go? Clues to this mystery lie in examining the construction of key parts of the Louvre, starting with one of the oldest parts, the reception room of the Lescaut Pavilion.
The Caryatides room is a good example of the Louvre's mystery, a whole which seems coherent, homogeneous, magnificent, but which is the result of a history that is much more complex.
It's one of the most remarkable rooms of the Renaissance Louvre, a ballroom as large as 3 tennis courts. Its dimensions are astonishing, even today. But there's something strange about the layout of this room.
If you look closely at the vault, you can see that it's supported by pillars. These pillars are hidden just behind columns that are placed in the corners.
This is a sign that these vaults were added after the original construction. But why? A 3D reconstruction exposes the evolution of the building. King Henry II wanted this reception hall to be as large and as high as possible to dazzle his distinguished guests. His architects chose to install a wooden ceiling.
This vault gives the impression that it's always been there, and in fact that's not the case at all. In the beginning, there was a ceiling with beams. It was simply a very long span ceiling, as there were almost 14 meters between the 2 walls.
They placed 14 beams, 14 meters long and 2.5 meters apart, braced by corbels to support the ceiling.
The original Grand Reception Hall had a ceiling over 15 meters high.
But over time, a problem emerged. There was another room directly above that was often busy. Under the weight of numerous courtiers, it collapsed.
The builders would have to find a new way to support the ceiling.
They decided to make a low stone vault, not very high, but a vault that would rest on masonry blocks that would be raised. Here we see the genius of the French architects who worked in succession to improve the structure.
In another, less well-known part of the building, there are more hidden architectural secrets. The best way to expose them is to examine the structure on a satellite scale. With the disappearance of the Tuileries Palace and the creation of the pyramid as the entrance to the museum, the layout of the Louvre has been transformed. But a monumental and grand entrance to the Louvre Palace has long been forgotten.
One of the most innovative places in the history of the Louvre's architecture is what is known as the colonnade du Louvre. It's a building that we don't look at much today because it seems to be the back of the Louvre. But you have to understand that at the time of the French kings, the layout was completely the opposite.
It's true that this great facade, which is truly remarkable, is little known, but it's a great piece of architectural bravery.
The monument is immense, 170 meters long, with 52 columns on the facade that are almost 12 meters high. How did the builders manage to assemble these stones and make sure they would stay standing?
At the time of Louis XIV, this was one of the most remarkable building sites of his reign. The project of the century in terms of technical prowess and construction, the lifting of large monoliths, large stones.
So how did the builders achieve this architectural feat? Clues lie high up on the underside of the colonnade. Access to the roof of the Louvre is tightly controlled, but it's the only way to study the masonry's hidden engineering.
We're here in the part which is above the supporting columns, so in the part just above the columns, but inside the actual facade. So what we see here is part of the metal structure that helps to reinforce the whole of this facade, and what's exceptional on this facade is to have done it on such a scale and at such a time.
The latest technology can be used to reveal what is hidden inside. The 3D reconstruction of the structure exposes the full extent of the challenge.
There's metal absolutely everywhere. And so this architecture is a trick. Because from the outside, it looks like cut stone, like used in antiquity. But in reality, iron plays an absolutely essential role.
Engineers chose a technique that would reinforce the stone. They used iron as a framework for the stone elements, ensuring the stability of the structure.
The principle of reinforced stone is to give the rock mechanical characteristics that it doesn't have naturally, because otherwise stone works very well under compression, but not well under tension.
So the Louvre is quite an exciting piece of architecture because it's sometimes a little misleading. What you look at and what you notice first is not necessarily the most important thing.
The Louvre Palace hides daring and innovative techniques at each stage of its construction. The latest monumental achievement, the glass pyramid built in the 1990s, also conceals some well-kept secrets.
The pyramid is a superb structure that represents the architectural audacity of its designer.
The pyramid gave rise to an extremely intense debate at the time of its creation. It's a radically modern form.
This monumental structure is 21 meters high and made entirely of glass and steel. Now, for the first time since its construction, a technical drone is being used to inspect the building.
This is a drone configured for industrial work. There are quite a few sensors that can be used in case of problems.
This is a once-a-day operation. In the past, it was done with rope climbers abseiling down from the top of the pyramid, and this is the first time we've done it by drone. We fly extremely close to the pyramid, as close as 3 meters, so it's quite complicated. We have obstacle detectors on the drone, but the pilots are trained to fly very close to the structure, and we try to leave nothing to chance. And so we've automated it and have predefined routes that the drone follows. We have a pilot who monitors the drone. He's there to take care of the images and to make the drone back off if it flies too close to the pyramid.
The drone takes 2,500 photographs on each of the 4 sides, recording detail down to 0.2 millimeters. A 3D scan exposes the first secret of the pyramid's construction. It's formed from 603 panes of glass, 95 tons of steel, and 105 tons of aluminium, heavier than a passenger jet. It covers an area of more than 1,000 square meters. But this pyramid is just a small part of a hidden technical wonder.
The most exceptional part of the pyramid isn't what you see from the outside, it's what you see when you're underneath. When you walk in the carousel today, you get the impression that that's it. But in fact, 3/4 of the space is hidden. It looks one way on the top, but then you realize that's just the tip of the iceberg.
The true scale of the technical challenge can only be revealed on a satellite scale.
The pyramid is just a small element. You need to remember that almost the entire Napoleon courtyard was excavated, plus a large part of the underground carousel mall.
The construction of the pyramid created an access point for visitors to the museum and made it possible to develop a whole range of underground services, even a small shopping mall, which was created when this project for the Grand Louvre was completed.
Nearly 100,000 square meters of surface area were developed, including an underground avenue 1.5 kilometers long and 4 meters wide, which connects each of the historic wings of the palace.
The contrast is absolutely striking between the Louvre of today and that of 150 years ago.
The pyramid sits atop an underground city built 30 years ago. It represents just a small part of the full construction at the time. Its position in the very center of the Napoleon courtyard underlines the genius of the builders of the Louvre. Evidence suggests that the architects of this palace planned the layout so that it would provide a remarkable view for onlookers. The Louvre is a unique monument, once a huge royal residence, now the largest museum in the world. This imposing architectural ensemble on the banks of the River Seine is anchored by the pyramid, an architectural jewel which shines in its heart, the center point of a breathtaking view. The pyramid and the Arc of the Carousel seem to line up with the obelisk of the Place de la Concorde, the Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe, and finally, the Arche de la Défense. A perspective of almost 8 kilometers. This view is considered one of the most beautiful in Paris. How did the builders achieve such a feat?
When you look at this view, you get the impression that the whole Louvre palace is perfectly symmetrical. But in fact, that's not at all the case.
What's the secret behind this lack of symmetry in one of the most emblematic monuments of France? On a satellite scale, there's a clear 6% misalignment of the Louvre, a discrepancy so large that it cannot be a calculation error. So why did the architects plan the building like this?
This lining up of the view wouldn't have been possible until 1871, because a palace, the Tuileries Palace, once stood between the two wings of the Louvre.
Georadar technology reveals that the Tuileries Palace had imposing dimensions, 260 meters long, so it completely obscured the Louvre to the west. Today, there is nothing left of this iconic palace. In 1871, during a revolt against the ruling power, the palace was completely destroyed by fire. But fortunately, some elements of the Tuileries Palace survived. Negin Mathieu is the director of research at the Louvre and joins Amélie Métivier, a stone restorer, to visit the ditches of the Great Colonnade. Negin is in charge of securing the key to this vaulted room. And for good reason. This room contains an invaluable treasure kept out of sight.
You can find the remains of the Tuileries Palace here, one of the most important palaces in the history of France and also in the history of architecture in France. The Tuileries Palace had an amazing history. It burned for several days, and the ruins remained for more than 10 years.
Analyzing these remains exposes the ferocity of the fire.
Here the stone has broken up a little into slabs and eroded. It would seem that this is due to the strong heat that these stones were subjected to at the time of the Tuileries fire. Even when the fire went out, it wasn't possible to get close because the heat was so strong.
The disappearance of the Tuileries Palace gave the Louvre a new layout.
This fire changed the face of the Tuileries Palace, of course, but also of the Louvre Palace and even the city of Paris. We had a very closed imperial city under Napoleon, and this destruction finally opened the palace to the city.
Examining the site on a satellite scale reveals that the axis of the former Tuileries Palace corresponds perfectly to the historical view of Paris. The architects planned the layout in relation to the Tuileries Palace, and not in relation to the Louvre.
So the view as we see it today isn't the one that was originally conceived, since it was planned for a palace that no longer exists. And the disappearance of the Tuileries has allowed the Louvre views toward the city in an extremely broad way, because the perspective allows the Louvre to be projected very, very far into the city.
But the satellite-scale images show that this is not the only part of the palace which is asymmetrical. Its wings follow two different axes which are not parallel. On one side, the Great Gallery which follows the course of the Seine, and on the other side, the Richelieu wing, which has to fit around the layout of the streets of Paris. The result, the Louvre's plan is irregular. So how did architects conceal the anomaly? Once again, they resorted to a simple but effective trick.
This is the great work of the 19th century architects who were obsessed by the idea of making us believe that everything is regular, and so the solution they find to this problem is to create an optical illusion.
The courtyards located on the Seine are perfectly rectangular, while the courtyards, which are located between the left side of the pyramid and the Rue de Rivoli, they have a trapezoid shape. So we're not aware of it when we are around the pyramid, when we approach the area from here. But in fact, it's a rather clever trick. You have to have a very sharp eye to realize this.
The architect's stroke of genius corrected the error of symmetry when viewed from the center of the Louvre. Many technical and architectural innovations were made during the construction of the palace. But as the building neared completion, the Louvre would undergo a new metamorphosis. It is known today as the largest museum on the planet. The Mona Lisa, the Wedding of Cana, priceless works of art are admired by more than 10 million visitors each year. In the 18th century, when it was decided to turn the palace into a museum, the rooms were small and dark, reserved for the king and his court.
Among the Louvre's most important metamorphoses is the transformation of a royal residence into a museum.
The creation of the museum dates to 1793. It was really at the end of the 18th century that the royal palace was transformed into a museum, and the question arose of lighting to present the works to the public.
So how did architects radically change the use of these buildings? How can a royal residence be transformed into one of the largest museums ever built, capable of housing priceless works of art and millions of visitors?
The history of the Louvre is a true history of architectural innovation in Europe.
From ground level at the Louvre, there are few clues to expose the transformation from a royal palace to a museum. But satellite images reveal a radically different view of the Louvre. All the roofs have been opened up. Glass canopies cover most of the museum. How were these openings created?
Here we are under the roofs of the Louvre, under the beams in a glass roof, which are quite modern because they've been wired for electricity, and further along we can see older beams in a glass roof from the 19th century.
They decided that the best light came from the sky. It's a diffused, even light. So they had this very original idea of making holes in the ceiling.
What's interesting here is that next to the wooden frame, we have a steel frame, a canopy, and finally, an oculus, giving indirect light into the room below us.
The glass canopies provide a natural lighting source that revolutionized the design of museums throughout the world at the end of the 19th century. Investigations on a macroscopic scale reveal that the frames are built entirely of metal to support the glass canopies, as seen at the top of the Daru Pavilion, one of the highest in the Louvre, which lights a monumental staircase.
This steel structure, in its workmanship, is characteristic of frames built in a number of rooms in the Louvre for natural lighting during the Second Empire.
Engineers built 10,000 square meters of glass roof. But how did this revolutionary idea of opening up the ceiling and creating metal frameworks come about? Clues hidden in some structures reveal that it all began at the Louvre. Examining the building on a satellite scale exposes a unique glass roof, today inaccessible from inside. The reconstruction of this framework in 3 dimensions reveals the historical structure. The framework of the Salon Carré measures 23 by 15 meters. It supports a central glass roof of 13 by 5 meters and is formed from 16 tons of wrought iron.
The glass roof of the Carré Lounge is a real originality. It's a novelty that we only realized quite recently.
By analyzing the steel structure and checking ancient documents, experts realized that it is the oldest surviving example in the world an icon of engineering built during the French Revolution.
The steel structure of the lounge was actually created in 1789. It's quite incredible because the engineers were working on the metal frame at the same time that the Bastille was being overrun.
The choice of wrought iron for these frames was a technical innovation at the time.
They were obsessed with the question of fire. There was only one way to protect works of art from fire. Wood was banned completely. And so at the Louvre, they were going to test some of the first metal frameworks in existence in France.
This framework is one of the first prototypes of a metal-structured glass roof, an innovative concept that would inspire museums all over the world. Despite the gigantic size of some rooms, such as the Great Gallery or the Caryatids Hall, there is a lack of space in the museum, especially to house monumental statues. Clues to how architects solved this problem are revealed by examining the building on a satellite scale. In the 90s, architects decided to cover the service courtyards and turn them into huge exhibition spaces.
So here we are, at a much more contemporary roof that was made at the time of the work on the Grand Louvre in the 1990s. It's a technical feat to have been able to cover this roof because of its incredible dimensions.
3D modeling techniques expose the detail of this lightweight structure, formed from 14-centimeter wide steel tubes and supported by a network of stainless steel cables.
We have dimensions of 60 meters by 40, that's to say a little more than 2,000 square meters. It's a feat of engineering because the walls of this courtyard are not parallel to each other. The covering above here must cancel out that problem of parallels.
The final challenge for architects was making it invisible from the ground in order to respect the architectural integrity of the Rue de Rivoli in the center of Paris. The problem of lighting the museum was solved, but there's still another difficulty. In this museum, only a tiny proportion of all the objects are on display. For every square meter of space used to show works of art, at least twice as much invisible infrastructure is needed. The Louvre needed storerooms, laboratories, offices, workshops, but none of this originally existed, so engineers had to dig underground galleries.
Every time you dig, you find remains and more history to be discovered.
Negin Mathieu is exploring the first basements created in the Louvre. This underground city was built at the end of the 19th century to allow the museum to function properly.
We're in the basement of the Louvre. We're under the Venice de Milo room. This is under the Vieux Louvre, one of the oldest parts of the Louvre. There is a labyrinth of corridors, spaces that have been used for storage, organization, and support for the museum.
In this maze of secret corridors, some spaces have been abandoned and forgotten.
Walking in the Louvre also means discovering hidden spaces that are fragments of history. You walk along this Philip Augustus enclosure and you come across a remnant of the Second World War. An anti-aircraft shelter has been dug here.
These historic underground passages are proof that there are still unknown places to be rediscovered.
Every time we dig, as soon as we start, we come across older remains. Every time we excavated, we made a discovery. Today, modern technology allows us to discover, without always digging, old remains that are hidden underground.
Investigating the Louvre's basements provides a glimpse of the many layers of the monument's construction, a series of innovations that make the Louvre's hidden underbelly a mosaic of diverse building techniques. The Louvre, this stone colossus in the heart of Paris, seems unshakable. But early on, the building did show signs of fragility, especially the 460-meter-long gallery built on the banks of the Seine.
It should be remembered that part of this gallery collapsed in the 19th century after very considerable movements. Since then, there were surveys which showed that the walls had moved more than 60 centimeters from their original position.
Any movement of the building could cause more than just major structural problems. Some areas of the Louvre are built with priceless sculpted and painted decorations that could be damaged by the slightest movement of the masonry.
I often tend to think that the palace itself is the first work of art that is presented to the visitors. This building must remain perfectly still. In a building such as the Louvre, the aim is to prevent any possible incident. The room for error must be kept as small as possible.
When the human eye isn't enough to monitor this 270,000 square meter complex, the latest technology is needed to examine the monument in minute detail. One of the newest methods of investigation is photogrammetry. Used today on one of the oldest and most precious parts of the Louvre, the Apollo Gallery, built perpendicular to the Seine in the 17th century.
We're going to scan the walls of the Apollo Gallery. This is a telescopic carbon pole that allows us to raise the camera up to 12 or 13 meters. So we're going to cover the wall by taking photos every 50 centimeters to be able to do 3D modeling.
Photogrammetry allows investigators to create a precise 3D reconstruction of reality, shedding new light on architectural and decorative features.
We use photogrammetry a lot because we create an image, so we have a visual archive, and in addition to photogrammetry, we have a geometric archive as well. We have the 3D model, so we can examine it section by section, both horizontally and vertically, and we have dimensions almost to the millimeter.
This 3D mapping of the Louvre exposes the evolution of the old buildings and helps engineers detect the slightest structural movement. In some places, major cracks have been uncovered. So what is the condition of the Louvre's foundations?
Some of the foundations were poorly known. We didn't know how deep they were buried.
The foundations are inaccessible, buried several meters deep under the building. But today, science and technology make it possible to detect the invisible and probe the impenetrable.
What's interesting today with modern radar technology is that it offers us a non-destructive method to investigate foundations, pillars, or walls to understand the structure.
Now, an exceptional project is giving engineers the opportunity to examine the underside of the palace. Thanks to new construction techniques, they will dig under the Visconti courtyard in the heart of the museum and under part of the Grand Gallery to create new exhibition rooms.
The technical challenge of this project is to dig 15 meters deep near the facades without risking the collapse of the pillars that surround the courtyard and support the galleries around the Visconti courtyard. Here's the Mona Lisa and the Visconti courtyard just behind. It's completely crazy. Nobody believed in it at first. Digging so close to the heritage collections and to a work as important as the Mona Lisa, with all the technical constraints that it can cause, it's completely crazy.
But the work has already begun. At this exceptional construction site, the latest technology is used to scan the ground and examine the state of the foundations. Engineers can't afford to take risks while digging under the Louvre, one of the most renowned buildings in the world.
It's precious, it's fragile, so we have to adapt to this reality. We've chosen a non-destructive method, a radar method, which allows us to bring back a certain amount of qualitative information on the constitution of materials and structures.
You can really see what's underneath, but the challenge with radar is that you see things, but you don't necessarily know what it is.
After analyzing radar readings, the team used core sampling at strategic points in the Louvre to probe the subsoil of Paris. The first revelation is that the foundations are much shallower than expected. A stone building of this height usually requires foundations 3 to 6 meters deep.
It was not at all expected to discover that the foundations were very shallow, just 1.8 to 2 meters for some. That's almost the height of a person.
Today, it's inconceivable to imagine that we could make a building that might move and eventually collapse. But this risk was probably taken for granted during the Renaissance.
But to investigate the current condition of the foundations, it's necessary to change scale and examine the stone using an electron microscope.
The Louvre is here. In our hands, we have samples from the foundations, from the Visconti courtyard of the Louvre.
These fragments are from the core samples taken from the basement of the Louvre and will be examined on a microscopic scale to determine their nature and properties.
These materials will be taken and we'll make them speak. We'll test them, we'll identify the stone, its load-bearing capacity, its resistance to crushing and impact by the weight of the structures.
Scientists use an electron microscope to bombard an object with a beam of electrons, the smallest particle in an atom. The object is placed in a vacuum chamber, and the wave-like characteristics of the electron magnifies the object's image, allowing the scientists to examine the material at high resolution.
The usual magnification is from a few hundred times to several thousand times. These are the most common techniques, but we can go much higher, up to 300,000 times.
This microscopic study exposes characteristics and structure of the stone which are completely invisible to the naked eye.
This electron microscope investigation technique is key to highlighting symptoms.
The microscope exposes a second revelation about the foundations of the Louvre. The research team discovered that the concrete under the stone foundations is damaged.
The stones themselves were in a rather satisfactory state, like any good Parisian limestone. But it's the surrounding concrete slabs at fault. At the time, concrete was undoubtedly very badly prepared. It's not the modern concrete that we know, very compact and very closed. Here, we're dealing with a porous material.
This is a double threat for the Louvre. Investigations reveal that not only are the foundations extremely shallow, but that the materials used at the time have lost their strength.
The Louvre is essentially a colossus with feet of clay from the point of view of its location. The palace is on the banks of the Seine, so therefore it's built on sand.
The banks of the Seine are particularly soft, and water infiltration due to bad weather and flooding weakens the old concrete and endangers some historic buildings. Faced with these revelations, the engineers must find a solution to consolidate the foundations and secure this part of the museum.
Now we have extremely sophisticated techniques for creating foundations that didn't exist in the past, and in particular for hardening the soil to some extent.
Engineers choose a technique called jet grouting.
Jet grouting is the technique of cement injection under pressure.
They drill several meters into the ground and then spray in a self-hardening cement. Hundreds of underground columns now reinforce the eroded foundations of the Visconti court.
All this is due to modern techniques which ensure a very good stability to the most recent parts of the Louvre. On the other hand, for the older parts, obviously the techniques were more rudimentary and a certain amount of risk remains.
But even the most recent structures can show signs of fragility.
30 is the age of the first wrinkles. We don't expect to find any serious symptoms, but from time to time it's necessary to make an inventory of the work and make an assessment to highlight work necessary for its renovation and conservation over time.
The Pyramid of the Louvre is an architectural gem, a huge 2,000 square meter glass roof supported by a spiderweb of stainless steel.
When you make a work of this type, you're making a very large greenhouse, and therefore you have very significant thermal expansion. Because the structure of the pyramid is exposed to temperatures of 60 to 70 degrees in the summer. So the changes in temperature generate dimensional variation and the structure changes.
To study the behavior of this monumental structure, investigators turn to advanced technology that can expose whether the pyramid is undergoing too much movement. The team wait until the middle of the night to take precise measurements using a laser scanner, a technique known as laser grammetry.
It's a 3D scanner, so it will completely digitize the pyramid. The laser takes about 1 million points per second. It scans the lines continuously and rotates as it travels. So we'll have a cloud of points representing the pyramid in 3 dimensions. The pyramid, between day and night, can get deformed, especially during the day when the sun is shining, which alternately hits each of the faces from east to west. So we do the measurements at night so that we can measure when it isn't moving.
The 3D modeling reveals that the structural elements of the pyramid can undergo deformations of several centimeters in a single day. But the measurements also reveal that the whole pyramid has notably shifted.
Since 1989, it has settled down a few millimeters at the base, so the whole structure has dropped just a few millimeters. This is something that we track because we're on a slab that is huge, with huge overhangs, so we have to keep track of these parameters.
Built over 8 centuries, the Louvre is an iconic and unique monument. From the oldest foundations to the most recent structures, the latest technology makes it possible to study and protect this monument, which many consider to be the true masterpiece of the museum.
The Louvre is a permanent theater of experimentation even today. Architects try things, find solutions, experiment, and have great success.
The Louvre, this palace of kings in the heart of Paris, is a testimony to architectural innovation.
The Louvre is a place of excellence, which means that engineers wanted to provide what they thought was the best, even if it meant transforming what had come before.
8 centuries of technical daring that have transformed a fortified castle into the largest museum on the planet.
The Louvre has always been the scene of experimentation, technical and architectural innovations, from the medieval Louvre to the pyramid in the middle of the Napoleon courtyard.
The Louvre is a museum city, a living structure with more than 2,000 employees working every day and 25,000 daily visitors who come to admire its works of art. An immense machinery that doesn't stop. Now, new investigative tools have made it possible to explore this building structure.
Today's methods make it possible not to destroy, not to build, but to allow the discovery of hidden remains, using non-immersive means that allow new stories to be told.
New technology is also raising fresh questions about a monument that historians thought they knew well.
New technology will bring answers, but also expose secrets.
Surveying the basements of the Tuileries will reveal the exact nature of the remains, maybe more, perhaps discovering new forgotten rooms.
Sometimes we discover things that haven't been seen for 200 or 300 years. When we find a room, a hiding place, that's exciting. It's a job for which we have devices that are almost like toys, and which allow us to discover our inner child when we find exciting results.
The Louvre's scale is immense, as are its component buildings, whole sections of which aren't yet fully investigated.
The Louvre is a monument, an extraordinary museum. It's a historical patchwork that has been built up over time, one after the other, one thanks to the other.
A colossus of engineering, a true architectural masterpiece whose design was often ahead of its time.
There have been a few world premieres at the Louvre. Our wish is that there will be more. The pyramid is also a unique building. We're at a palace that is 8 centuries old and is constantly innovating.